Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. Today is a special Sunday in the church's year called Gaudete Sunday. In the middle of all of the penitential seasons, the church has always historically given you one season to focus on joy and thanksgiving, which is why this day is important here in the middle of Advent, and which is why we have this very historical epistle reading for us today. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. I also feel as though it's there to kind of test me, because I hear this epistle rejoice while I have to be wearing a pink dress. But that aside, what is it about this day? What is it about this verse? Rejoicing, I think, is something that most of us, especially as adults, don't necessarily find natural. It seems that we tend to lose this capability of pure joy yet when we're still children. If you want to think of someone with pure, unadulterated joy, think of a 2-year-old before their birthday cake. They are yet so innocent and have no problem being just entirely full of themselves at that very moment, filled to the brim with joy. It is so rare that you see an adult with that sort of joy, isn't it? I think this is why St. Paul encourages us. I think this is why Gaudete Sunday encourages us on these days to hear this enjoinder from the Apostle Paul. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. And so today I want to look at these verses and try and figure out together, number one, what is it that we have to rejoice about? Number two, how do we learn how to do it? And number three, what benefits will it give us in our lives? And so to get started, I would like to begin with just this second verse. I think it begins in a place that all of us can relate to. St. Paul says this, have no anxiety about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Now, anxiety, there's a thing that I think I can relate to far more easily than the rejoicing. I'm not naturally a joyful person. I tend to be a little cantankerous myself. Just ask my wife and kids. They know. But look at what we tend to do. It's no wonder that we're not really joyful people. Think of what you spend most of your time doing from day to day to day. Most of us don't spend our days going from minute to minute, rejoicing about this or that or the other. Most of our days are filled with worry and concern about this in our schedule and how our calendars are overfilled and how our boss wants us to do this and our kids need us to do that. And I've got dishes from last night and laundry from last week that I'm still trying to catch up with. We give ourselves everything else to think about except for that which would make us joyful. It is no wonder that we as adults in our world are so filled with anxiety, because we have filled our minds and our hearts and our schedules and our houses with so many other different things. And we lose track of the fact that we have a great deal to be joyful about. Especially now during Advent, which is itself the season of hope. I'm sure that all of you have heard of the 4 cardinal virtues of Aristotle, which are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. But many of us have not heard of the 3 heavenly virtues of St. Paul. The virtues of faith and hope and love. And St. Paul says the greatest of these is love. But the church has also always taught that no single one of them stands without the other. If we are to have love, we must also have faith and hope. If we are to have faith, we must also have hope and love. And if we are to have hope, we must have faith and love. And I think that hope, in many ways, is where all of it begins. After all, doesn't the writer to the Hebrews say that faith is the substance of things hoped for? In many ways, all of it begins with hope. Hope creates faith, and hope and faith together create love. And without these three things, do we really and truly have Christianity? And so what is this Christian hope that Advent is all about? What is this Christian hope that is supposed to fill us with so much joy? Christian hope, my friends, is not like the hope of this world. You see, in general, when we talk about hope, when we say we hope something will happen, usually what we mean is, I don't really think it's going to happen. Hope, the way we usually use the word, is like a wife saying, I hope my husband remembers our anniversary this year. What she means is it would be nice, but it's probably not going to happen. It's like a student who says, I hope I get an A on this test, which means I really want one, but I know it's a long shot. That, my friends, is not what Christian hope is like. Listen again to the writer of the Hebrews who says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. The very substance of things hoped for. Christian hope is not some shadowy wish, but it is the future consummation of our whole life in Christ, reaching back through time and grabbing us where we are today and pulling us forward to the glories of that reality which one day will be. The perfect union of love and goodness and grace that we will all certainly find in Him. Christian hope is the very substance of our future glory, making itself evident in the here and in the now. Now, my friends, that is something to rejoice about, is it not? Let us learn then how we can take our eyes off of all of this anxiety and instead learn to rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. So how do we learn this joy that seems so very foreign to each and every one of us? Well, I think St. Paul gives us a nice instruction. Here with this verse. He says, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Now, two different things that I would like to point out about this verse. First of all, is that most of us spend all of our days doing the exact opposite of what he says. We don't spend every minute thinking about what is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, gracious, excellent, or praiseworthy. Rather, we think about all of the terrible things that we have to do. We think about how we feel like we're constantly behind and how very difficult life seems to be when this happens or that happens and everything that could go wrong. No wonder we get to the end of our days exhausted and have no time for joy. But beyond that, I also want to point out these last four words. When St. Paul says, think about these things, a lot of us want to form this portion of the verse into some sort of a Peter Pan Christianity. Think happy thoughts. And you can fly, you can fly, you can fly. That's not what St. Paul is talking about. This is not some sort of self-help Tinkerbell. The Greek word here for think is logizomai. You might hear the root for the word logic in there. What he is saying is take time to think deeply, to consider logically and in a matter of process the nature of what is true, what is honorable, what is just, what is pure, and so on and so forth. It saddens me that when you use the word meditation among Christians today, most of them glaze over because all they can think of is some guru at the top of a mountain someplace in Tibet. But there is a long tradition of Christian meditation that doesn't look like you with crossed legs at the top of a mountain. But it looks like each of us taking seriously truth, honor, justice, purity, and praise. It looks like each of us taking time in silence, in quiet, in solitude, to think deeply and meaningfully about God and His presence and His love and His grace and His goodness. One of my favorite theologians is the great English theologian Julian of Norwich from the 12th century. And one of the things that she said is that God is the goodness in all things. And so what does it mean, friends, when we think deeply about that, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, whatever is excellent, whatever is praiseworthy? When we think on these things, what we do is we think deeply about God Himself. We learn to find God's omnipotent presence in every little aspect of our lives. And so now, instead of focusing on this negative thing and that negative thing and that negative thing, instead we find God wrapped up like a present in every moment, in every action, in every place, in everything, and in every person. And as we unwrap Him and find Him there, what we are finding is Christian hope. What we find is God reaching back from our future and grabbing us in our present reality and pulling us toward Him. We find that He is everywhere and always, working all things to the good. And then, my friends, we have something to rejoice about. When we learn to think deeply and to search for what is true, honorable, just, and pure, and praiseworthy, we learn how to find God in the here and now. We learn how to find true joy in the here and the now. And that brings me to my last point. What then do we reap because of this? St. Paul ends with, well, he doesn't end it. Right in the very middle, he's got this very verse that you hear every single Sunday in the blessing after Mass. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Isn't that exactly what all of us want? Is a peace that passes all understanding. In the midst of all the cares and all the concerns and all the things that could go wrong in this world, to have a peace that transcends all of those things. As if life is falling apart around you, but yet there you stand untouchable. Why? Because the peace of God Himself stands as a bulwark and a hedge, a strong tower round about you, lifting you above the mighty waves of this world. That is what we can gain from this practice of thinking deeply and finding God in all things, and learning to find joy. One of the things that I love the most about this verse is how he calls it the peace of God. A lot of us, I think, tend to think of this in such a way as if peace were a thing that is separate from God and He gives it to you. But I tend to think of it as being more possessive of His very nature. God Himself is peace. And when we find Him, His peace comes with Him. And we, because we've been united with Him in that moment, because we have found Him in this world, because we have found Him in our lives, we are so united with Him that we develop in a sense, a sort of divine peace. A peace that is not natural to ourselves. A peace that we could not conjure up on our own. A peace that belongs properly and only to God himself. A peace that truly passes all understanding because it is truly transcendent. Because it's not a human peace. It's a divine peace. And isn't that what our final consummation in Christ is all about? To be so united with him that we begin to burn with his divine glow as an ember thrust into the fire, as the church fathers used to say. Once again, this is our Christian hope. God reaching back from our future and giving us a foretaste of what is to come. And so, my friends, this Advent, the perfect time for this journey, let us dedicate ourselves to take it. Let us learn to take our eyes off of all the things that give us anxiety. Instead, let us learn to think deeply and to meditate deeply on the true, the honorable, the just, the pure, the praiseworthy. Let us find God wrapped up as a gift in every single little event and moment of our lives. Let us learn from this great joy, and let us experience the transcendent peace of God that passes all understanding. Let us heed the words of St. Paul this Advent. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.